Honourable member for Timmins, James Bay.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Always honoured to rise in this House and represent the people of Timmins, James Bay. For the folks back home, what we're discussing today is something that's been promised by the Liberal government to work collegially, to work in a minority, to try and bring solutions and not throw brickbats at each other. But we're seeing throughout this debate the Liberals are absolutely dead set against a reasonable solution. And the solution, Madam, is to a serious problem, which is the lack of dental care for more and more Canadians across this country. I talked to a young woman the other day who said to me something that I thought was a very powerful statement. She said, in Canada today, the economic dividing line is between those who have dental care and those who don't. Because if you don't have dental care, you are put at such basic sense of risk, but also such damage to self-worth. And I can tell you, Madam Speaker, from knocking on the doors in my region and my community, I see the impacts of not having access to dental care. And when you get into the great regions in the far north, into the communities of the Cree, the dental crisis is a serious medical crisis. So what are we proposing? Whenever we come forward with a reasonable suggestion, the Liberals start saying, there's the crazy NDP, pie in the sky, it's never good enough. Stick with the Liberals. We will make all the great promises, we just won't ever actually deliver on it. Pharmacare. Madam Speaker, that was so long ago, I think I was a child at the time, well, at least emotionally I was a child, and they're still promising pharmacare. And we just have to wait a bit longer. They tell us, you know, their great analogy is the loaf of bread. You know, why fight for a big loaf of bread when we can cut half a loaf of bread, and then we'll give it to Galen Weston. But we'll tell the rest of you that you're loved and you're cared for. And they're so cared for that they now have a minister for middle-class prosperity. You know, Madam Speaker, if it was a drinking game, every time this Prime Minister said middle class and you had to take a drink and then a shot for the follow-up line and those trying to join them, people would be bombed at the end of a 4-minute speech by this government. And I say that, Madam Speaker, in all seriousness, because this Prime Minister grew up in a very different middle class than my father and mother. I don't know the middle class he grew up in the town of Mount Royal, but my mother and father were the children of hard rock miners. My mom quit school at 15 and got a job. My dad quit school at 16 and got a job. And he became a member of the middle class at 40 when he could go to university. And my mom would type his notes when he'd come home 12 hours on an all-night bus back to Timmins. But getting a university degree then meant he became a professor of economics. That was the middle class. And middle class meant that my dad could buy a little house. It wasn't a big house, and it took him 25 years to pay it off. And we had one car, and when that car died, it just stayed in the driveway. My dad never got another one. But it meant that his kids could go to school and come out without debt because they could get a summer job. That was the middle class. That was the middle class. So when you ask the middle class prosperity minister, what's the middle class? She says, well, it's hard to define. It's for people who have stuff. That's it. It's for people who have kids in hockey. Well, what about the families who don't have kids in hockey? What about the families who are working 3 jobs, full-time, and they're not able to pay their rent? It's called the gig economy. Now, the finance minister, who's pretty much the minister of the 1%, he says, hey, get used to it. It's the new normal. It's the not new normal. It is the direct result of deliberate economic policies by the Liberals and Conservatives going back and forth, that have deteriorated the once strong middle class that was the basis of the economic engine of this country. So when we're starting to talk now about dental care, for people who have to make a choice between paying their rent, looking after their children, as someone said, getting their car fixed so they can get to work, or getting their teeth fixed. We're in a very different economic reality. So what's the solution, Madam Speaker? Well, it's quite simple. The Liberals, whenever they don't know what to do, they give money to wealthy people and tell us we'll all benefit. It was the first thing the finance minister did, his tax cut for the middle class and those wanting to join them. I.e., if you make $150,000 a year, you're going to love these guys. If you're making $40,000 a year, they got nothing for you but a lot of nice affirmations. So we got that tax cut. You know, the minister of the 1%, he's given us $14 billion in tax cuts over the last 5 years. These are cuts to revenue that could be used to actually invest in things like they say they support, like pharmacare, like addressing the horrific shortage in national housing that they keep saying is going to be the best, the greatest, the most incredible investment ever, but they're just not spending the money, and they don't know where the money is because they gave it away in tax cuts. So their latest tax cut, if you're making $150,000 a year, you're going to do very well. If you're making less, you're going to get from very tiny to diddly squat. So the reasonable alternative is to say, Madam Speaker, at $90,000 a year, if you're making $90,000 a year or over at this time, you don't need that money. And we will take that money and we will put it in to a national dentistry fund that will help 1.4 million Canadians. Now, the Liberals seem to think this is shocking finances. You know, it wasn't shocking finances when they wrote a check of $4.5 billion to Trans Mountain to get them to go away. Then we bought ourselves a pipeline. Now they just keep adding $1 billion every few months. No problem there. They didn't have to factor that out. They didn't have to cost it out. But they're saying, oh, my God, to cost out a national dental care program, how would we do that? Well, what we know is that, yeah, in the first year, it's going to get a lot of people going to them. But then it settles in at about $800 million a year. So it's pretty clear that if we decide that we're not going to just give more benefits to the rich, to the so-called the people who have all the stuff, and we put in a dental plan, it's going to make life much better for many Canadians. It's doable, but it's about political will, Madam Speaker. I think the other issue is we talk about federal and provincial jurisdiction. When we have provinces, c'est clair, la province de Québec.
It's clear that in the province of Quebec, there's a great deal of credibility to offer services to its citizens. If the government of Quebec decides to offer a program, the NDP supports the principle of asymmetrical federalism for Quebec in order to implement a plan and to receive funding from the federal government.
For the other provinces, like, say, Jason Kenney's Alberta, who would say, oh, we love a national dental care plan, we'll have to give it to some oil execs, we would say, no, that money has to go to dental care, because we have to protect the rights of citizens in this. If we're going to change how we're doing tax money to actually help people, we have to make sure it's going to go there. So, Madam Speaker, in my 16 years in this House, I have seen the continual deterioration of the middle class through deliberate policies. The policies that downloaded the costs of university tuition and costs year after year after year onto students. So now students are coming out with $50,000, $60,000 to $100,000 in debt that they cannot get out of. I've seen the rise of the so-called precarious gig economy because it favors corporations not to have standards in place for employment. And that's crippling a young generation who's carrying those costs. I've seen the rise of housing prices in urban areas and in rural areas like mine, where we have 2,000 homeless people right now in the area of the city of Timmins, a city of 44,000 people. And for all the volunteers that we have, they cannot address that crisis without a national investment. And what we get from the government is we probably have the greatest national housing investment in words ever, but we're not seeing any buildings. And this is about choice. It is about the choice to invest in housing. It's about the choice to invest in our students. It's about the choice to invest in infrastructure. And here we have a clear choice not to give to the rich, but to establish a plan to help establish a national dental care plan. I appeal to my Liberal colleagues to do the right thing, to work with us and send a message that this minority parliament can work together. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Hear, hear.